Hello and welcome to the show. It's available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. I'm your host, Tavishima Ayede. Today is definitely going to be a noisy episode because it's a weekend and so the kids are home, so I expect to hear some interruptions in the background. If you'd love to connect and explore opportunities with me, then call me on 080-6466-2140 or WhatsApp me on the same number. The country code is +234 for those of you who are not Nigerian. Then for social media, connect with me on LinkedIn, which is where I spend most of my time. Today, today's episode is going to be one of those rambling episodes because this is a topic that I've addressed in the past on the podcast, but the question has come up again on the list. So I'll just come at it from a different background. And the question is, what are the negotiation tactics for high value deals? And I think we address this because I remember doing a series on high value deals maybe last month. I can't remember. So anyway, let's do a little recap anyway. So when we say high value deals over here on the podcast, this is what we mean. A high value deal is something that is bringing in high revenue. That just means that the figure on the transfer or the figure on the check or the figure on the invoice is big. So if it's a big number, then that's a high value deal. Of course, high value deals or high revenue is relative, because the thing that the wedding photo and video guy or girl will consider as big money is not the same sort of thing that somebody who is in architecture or who is in engineering will consider big money. So when you say high value deal, it's not an absolute number. So, excuse me, you can't say, sorry, one moment. So, excuse me, Hamatan over here, like I said. Where was I? So high value is relative. So you can't say anything above 500k is high value, or anything below 1M is not high value. It all depends. It's contextual. Who are you? What are you doing? What's the industry? Blah blah blah. But high value means high revenue, means big zeros, plenty of numbers at the end. Then high value can also mean high profit. When we say high profit, it just means pocket money, the one that enters your pocket at the end of the day, because there are people in situations where the amount on the transfer is like 1M, but by the time you finish everything, the one that will enter inside your own pocket, the pocket money is maybe like 50k. So because on the transfer it was 1M, we can't really say it was a high value deal if at the end of the day, by the time you share all the money, you give everybody their own cut, you pay all the boys, you pay this, you do this, you buy that, the one that enters your pocket is 50k, then you can't really say that was a high value deal. So it's not just how big are the number of zeros at the end of the day, it's also how much money did you take, what was the profit, what was the pocket money, what was your take home, what was your whatever it is that you want to call it, what was your own cut. Then it's also a high value deal if it leads to open doors. And of course, in the Nigeria context, when we say open doors, we just mean future connections for other high value opportunities. So you're doing something for somebody today and the thing is not really sweet, but you're hoping that if this thing clicks, then it could lead to another opportunity where you're going to get plenty of zeros at the end of the transfer, or you're going to get plenty of money in your pocket by the time the whole thing is done. Then those are high value deals. So over here on the podcast, when we say high value deals, high value opportunities, this is what we mean. So this is just the extent of the recap that I'm going to do because, like I said, I've already done episodes on the subject matter before. So once you're done listening to this episode, just go to YouTube because that'll be the easiest place to search. And all the episodes that I have done so far, over 970 episodes, everything is all there on YouTube. So just go to YouTube, type in Tavishima, and then type in high value deals. And every single podcast episode I've made about that is going to come up. And then since this podcast episode is about negotiations, it's the same thing. Go to YouTube, type Tavishima, type negotiation, and then hit enter. Every single episode that I've made about negotiations is going to come up. So listen to this episode, listen to all those other episodes, and you're going to get caught up to speed. So since I have already treated this topic in one way or another in the past, today what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run commentary on popular recommendations available on the internet, because I figured I've done this, so I already know what my own perspective is. So let me just check the internet, let me see what people are saying, and we can have a conversation over here. who knows? There might be some useful stuff about how to negotiate high value deals. And yeah, we did find some good things on the internet when I went and searched. There was plenty of talk there about preparation and research. And that is something I definitely endorse, because I've been saying it from day one over here on this podcast that freestyling is bad. The only time when freestyling is good is if we're doing hip hop. So all those boys on TikTok, especially those white rappers, as in they have mad rhymes. So freestyling on TikTok, that's good if you're a hip hop artist. But we're not hip hop artists here. We're trying to run a business. We're trying to pay school fees. We're trying to go on fancy holidays. We want to buy nice clothes. We want to eat good food. We want to have nice car. All those sorts of things. So freestyling is bad. We have to. The only people who can freestyle when it comes to a business context are people who have mastered the fundamentals. So like when you're a junior, like when you're a junior doctor, for instance, you might keep your medical textbook on your desk because you don't want to forget something. You want to be able to quickly reference. But by the time you've been doing this over and over and over again, the thing becomes internalized. You've mastered the fundamentals. And so people can just leave you on your own and you're going to be able to make the best decisions. But that's not really freestyling because you have mastered the fundamentals. Now, the same thing happens from a sales and business development perspective. Because when I was a young blood, as a wedding photographer, there were some calls I didn't want to take because I didn't have my diary handy with the list of questions that I needed to ask and things like that. But, it's been a couple of years now, so I've mastered those fundamentals, so I don't need to have my book with me. But when it comes to negotiations, on the other hand, freestyling, you can't say I know the fundamentals, therefore I can freestyle. No. Because the fundamentals might be the same, but the thing is the concrete context is always different. So if you're negotiating with someone today, let's see. Okay, I spoke about architects earlier. So let's say you're negotiating with someone today, you're an architect, but the people that you negotiated with last week were property developers in Abuja doing 500 units, low income housing or something. But then the people that you're negotiating with today are property developers in Lagos and I want to do 1,000 units, but then it is high income housing. So you can see now that the concrete context is different, and that's the reason why we have to prepare and we have to do some research, because fundamentally we know what's what, we know what's important, but the small changes in the concrete context, means we have to be prepared. These are the things that make one set of negotiations flow one way and another sets of negotiations flow another way. So yeah, definitely. If you've been checking on the internet and you saw stuff about preparation and research, I definitely endorse that, because, like I've been saying here on the podcast, freestyling is bad. Freestyling is wrong. Freestyling is a sin. Do not freestyle. Come up with well-tested and trusted frameworks. Make sure you do your research. Make sure that you are prepared. Do not freestyle. Then I also saw some stuff on the internet about knowing your value prop, which is cool. It makes sense. Value prop is just value proposition. And the way I like to define value proposition is just this. Your value proposition just means, why do people do business with me? That's the answer to the question. Whatever reason people give, that is your value prop. And you're better off finding out from your customers what your value prop is, because sometimes what you think your value prop is actually is not. And I've spoken about it on the podcast how, for me, I spent a long time as a younger wedding photographer thinking that the reason why people did business with me was because they didn't like being photoshopped. And I was confused when I would now end up with a bride who clearly wanted to be photoshopped. And for me, I just thought, look, my value proposition is clear now. Like, it's on my website. I state it clearly. It's on my Instagram. So, like, why are these kind of brides still coming my way who clearly do not fit this value prop? But then, when I started asking people that I'd done business with, I started off with the first bride that I handled her wedding in Abuja, and I asked her, she said, actually, I don't know why I do business with you. I just know that I like you. And I didn't know what to do with that, because that is not the kind of feedback we're looking for as business people. Someone says, I like you. I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do with that? But anyway, I started asking some other people, and it became clear that the reason why people were doing business with me had very little to do with my wedding photography skills. I thought for me, lack of Photoshop was the reason why people were coming to do business with me. But apparently, people were doing business with me because they like me. One bride said, "You're the only vendor that I never had to worry about." Another person said something about my professional skills. Another person said something about my timelines and blah, blah, blah. I got to find out that my value prop actually was all those other things that are not photography related. And this is the reason why I've been saying over here on the podcast, you guys need to be talking to your customers. You need to know what's up. Because, excuse me, you can be setting up your marketing, your branding, your everything, saying that, do business with me because this, because that. But the real reason why people are rushing you is something else. If you know what your key value prop is and you key into it in your branding, in your messaging, in your marketing, and your everything, then things are just going to go a whole lot more smoother. So if I had started this whole thing of talking to customers, like 15 years ago when I started in wedding photography, my branding, my positioning, my marketing, my everything would have been much more aligned around the real reason why people do business with me. So anyway, bottom line, what I'm trying to say is, yes, know your value proposition, but value proposition is not what you determine. Please talk to your customers and try and figure out, why do people do business with you? Whatever answer they give you, whether you like it or not, that is your value proposition. So yes, we should know our value proposition before we argue. Before we go into negotiations, because if you know your value prop, then of course you should be able to lean in on that and reinforce it time and time again. That look, this is going to be a sweet deal because this is our value prop. This is what we do. This is what you stand to get out of it. So while I agree with that, I'll say that we should also be keen to listen to other people and try and figure out what they think is valuable. Because it is one thing to come to the negotiating table knowing that, okay, this is my own value prop. But the thing is, the people on the other end, if they don't give an F about your value prop, then nothing for you. You're just saying something, repeating it, reinforcing it, and it will just be falling on deaf ears. So know your value prop, but then also be listening to them. Don't just be listening to them before you even get to the negotiating table, and try and figure out what they think is important and start thinking about it and talking about it in their own terms. Because if your own value prop is that, I don't know, let me see. If your value prop is you're the cheapest, okay, let me just stick with that, even though that's not a good value prop. So if your value prop is money-wise that you're the cheapest, but then they don't give an F about how cheap it is, what they're concerned about is quality and timelines, then you see that each time you talk about being cheap or talk about economic returns or talk about financial incentives, it will just be falling on deaf ears, because the thing that they want to hear actually is quality and timelines. If you say 3 weeks, it's 3 weeks, 3 weeks. If you say quality, is quality. Okay, we spoke about architects. Okay, architects don't do building. Architects only draw. And then let me just still go with the architect thing. Forgive me, even though architects don't build. So if you say quality, does it mean 80% sharp sand and 20% cement, or whatever the ratio is supposed to be? So know your value prop, yes, but go into it with an ear to listen to the other people and figure out what they think is valuable, and talk in terms of what they think is valuable. Because if you're talking in terms of what they don't value, all the stuff you're saying is just negligible, and that's not going to help your negotiations. Then there's also some stuff on the internet about understanding your BATNA. BATNA is it's an acronym, BATNA, and that just means best alternative to negotiated agreement. Now, for those of us who went to law school, this is something that we already know. So those of you who went to law school, don't turn up your eyes now. I mean, there are people here who didn't study law, so for them it's new. So let me explain it to you guys who haven't heard this before. Now, best alternative to negotiated agreement just means, as you're entering into the negotiations. Sorry, one moment, guy. Abuja is hot as hell. I don't know what's happening these days. Let me put on the fan. Unfortunately, the fan here is very loud and noisy. Okay, all right. Anyway, don't worry. Eventually, I'm going to be making enough money so I can go to air-conditioned studios and record all my episodes there. But until then, just make do with what I have over here. Where were we? Partner, yes. So partner just means before you enter in there and you start negotiating, you need to know your worst case scenario. You need to know, like, last, I won't die, or you just need to know when to stand up, basically. You need to know what your alternatives are. Like, if this deal does not click, what is the worst thing that will happen? So if this deal doesn't click and nothing will happen to you, you'll be able to stand up confidently and say, bros, it's been nice hanging out with you guys, but the way this thing is going, like, we can't deal. So don't worry, just read. Maybe next time. And then you stand up and you walk away. You need to know your partner. You need to know your walkaway point, because not all deals are good. Because you guys have showed up to the negotiation table does not mean you guys have to consummate this marriage. Doesn't mean. Some things don't make sense on paper. And trust me, we've all been there. There've been deals that you're thinking, okay, I'm kind of broke. Let me just take this thing. After all, 100K is better than nothing. But then by the time you enter, you now start wondering, like, all this stress on top 100K. And we've all been in that situation. So you need to know, heading in there, what is the worst case scenario? What are the alternatives you have? When are you going to walk away? Things like that. So that by the time these people are negotiating with you, if it is a price thing and it now hits your price threshold, you can be able to stand up confident and say, oh, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been fun, but at this point, it doesn't make any sense for us to continue. We'd love to work with you guys in the future. If anything else comes up, just give us a call and let's see what we can make happen. And then you just leave. Not all deals are good. Know when to walk away. The psychological, what will I say now? The psychological gishbang of this whole thing is, when you have a partner, the thing gives you one kind of confidence that people will be able to sense immediately, and it changes the dynamic of conversation. Because once you hit that point and you stand up and ready to walk away, it gives you a certain air of confidence. Okay, maybe in the beginning they were looking at you like, oh, she's a small girl, blah blah blah, she'll do whatever it takes to win this deal. But then it reaches your point and you say, oh, gentlemen, that at this point it doesn't make any sense for us to continue, something like that. The way that they were looking at you, the esteem, before they're looking at you as a small girl, your esteem, your status in their eyes will now rise. Now, okay, maybe she's not such a juvenile after all. We can't just be playing with her anyhow. So, you need to ask yourself these questions before you go in. This deal that we're trying to pursue, if this thing doesn't click, where are we? Is it good or is it bad? If this doesn't click, is there another alternative? The thing that we're trying to get from this deal, if we don't get it from this deal, can we get it in another place? Ask yourself all these questions, so that by the time you go there and it looks like these people are pricing groundnut on top of your head, you get to a point and you say, okay, at this point it's not making sense anymore, and then you leave. The funny thing is, there are some situations where you stand up and you say that, okay, this one don't pass my power. I'm out. If there's anything else, let's talk. And before you get to the door, they're like, no, come now, sit down now. It's not just negotiation. People do not price again. Like, calm down now. Come and sit down, let's talk. So sometimes actually rescue the deal, because you know what your partner is. You know when you're willing to walk away, and people can see that it's not a bluff. Because once you hit that point, you stand up and you leave. Oh, by the way, partner, walk away points, all these things, it's not always money. Sometimes it's maybe timelines. Maybe somebody's pressing you on some timelines that they want something delivered in 3 weeks. But in your own professional opinion, you know that 3 weeks is doable, but 3 weeks is tight, and you don't want to risk it. So if they're not willing to agree to 3.5 weeks, by the time they keep pushing 3 weeks, instead of putting your head somewhere and then you now go on hook in the future, because you can't do that 3 weeks, you actually need like 3 weeks and 3 days or something. You just say, now, oh, you know what? At this sense, it doesn't make sense for us to continue, because given our production history, the relationship we have with our partners, we can absolutely guarantee you that if it's 4 weeks, we can deliver on this and this and this and that and that. 3 weeks, it's going to be tight. The margin for error is going to be too great. We actually can't continue this conversation. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Future opportunities, let's be in touch. Let's chat. And then you stand up with your team and then you begin, head to the door. So just leave. It's not always money. It can be other things. So let's say when you're negotiating, you'll be negotiating money, that's price. You'll be negotiating quantity. You'll be negotiating timelines. You'll be negotiating deliverables. Warranty, guarantee, Different things you can negotiate. But I'm just saying that don't always think that it's all about the money. Sometimes the money is right, but the timelines are not right. So just be creative here. Then, let's see. Okay, yeah, there was some stuff on the internet about effective questioning. Oh, yeah, that's definitely something we should take on board. I also talk about that on the podcast. I always talk about how we need to have open-ended conversations. That is where you're trying to get the person to do most of the talking. You ask open-ended questions: who, why, what, when, how. What do you need? Why is this important? Why this over that? Just gets the people talking. Because it's when you use open-ended questions that you now get information about what they really need, what is their own actual priority, what is their own goal, what is their own what are their weaknesses, things like that. Because when we know what they want, what they need, what's important to them, what's not important to them, we now know how to reframe our ask or tailor our own position to make sure we can get what it is that we want. And of course, there was stuff on the internet about open and honest communications and how that fosters trust. So yeah, definitely, I'll say that too. Yeah, be open, be frank. Be yourself. No form levels. If you're not, don't go and pretend you're what you're not. So this whole fake it till you make it thing, I'm definitely not a fan, because you can be doing fake it till you make it, but when you're in the negotiation room and people have been talking for like 1 hour, everybody's getting angry, you're hungry, you're sweaty, your real self will begin to show. So don't, just be frank, be open, be authentic. Don't try and pretend that you're not what you are. Eventually the thing will come out, because negotiations take time. You can go there and don't be surprised that you guys might be there for 3 hours shouting back and forth. Or you might go and shout for 1 hour today and reconvene and come back next week Tuesday and shout again for another hour. Eventually your real self will come out. So don't try and form and be what you're not. Let's see what else. Anchoring. There's some stuff there about anchoring, and that's something that I want to emphasize over here on the podcast today, because some of you don't get it. Anchoring just means reference point. Whenever you are negotiating about something, whether it's money or whether it's timelines, you have to be able to set the reference point somewhere. Okay, since we're talking about timelines, let's say you get in and then you start talking about timelines early because you want to anchor timelines. All you have to do is just to say, how did I say it again? Okay, so based on the clients we've had in the past and our working, the relationship we have with our suppliers, a 4-week delivery time frame is the most reasonable something, blah, 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 blah. So maybe in reality, you actually need 2 weeks, but you want to try and anchor this thing at 4 weeks just to give yourself some wiggle room, so that if they agree to the 3 weeks, so if they agree to the, so what did I say? Okay, I said 4 weeks. So if they agree to the 4 weeks and we're going ahead, that gives you ample room to be able to deliver on your own side. But then if they try and negotiate back and forth and then we land at 3 weeks, in your own mind, it's 2 weeks you really need. That still gives you 1 week extra wiggle room to protect yourself. And that is what anchoring means. You have gone in and you have set a reference point that other people are going to dance around, that protects your own interests. And it's the same thing with money. There was somebody that I was talking to who was selling okay, I didn't want her to know I'm talking about her, but let me just say it anyway. Solar panels. And there was one quarrel that I used to have with her. She would always go straight to the lowest package. And I tried to talk to her from an anchoring perspective that, look, this thing we're talking about anchoring is really, really important. Because if your default, and I know this because as a wedding photographer, is one mistake that we used to make. You have 3 packages. You have the 150k package, you have the 250k package, and you have the 350k package, whether you call it gold, silver, and bronze. And some guys would just automatically fall straight to the lowest package. Now, that lowest package that you price at 150k, it assumes a certain profit margin for you. That is kind of comfortable for you to buy food, buy internet, and buy shawarma. And they also take your babe out once in a while. If you start off this whole thing on the lowest package, what do you think is going to happen? If you start the conversation off at 150k package, of course they'll price you down to 130 or maybe to 120. Already 20-30k has removed from your bottom line straight. So this whole thing about anchoring, it's a very big deal. And I used to tell her that stop this thing of automatically going straight to the lowest package. If you go straight to the lowest package, the only way you have to go is down. It's a losing proposition. You try and anchor high. So if 150 is looking like a reasonable amount for you, oh, by the way, I don't know what people charge in wedding photography again these days. So this is me just, throwing up figures. But whatever business you do, whether it's makeup or photography or you sell chicken eggs or whatever, if 150 looks like a reasonable thing for you, then do not go in there and then start the discussion at 150k. Please go in there and start talking the discussion at 200. So by the time people shout back and forth and you argue and everything and they price you down, in their mind they removed 40k, so you agreed on 150. In your mind you'll be thinking, okay, if I had gotten 150, I would have been happy. Now I have 160, which is 10k more. And that exactly is what anchoring is. Set your reference points. Try and anchor. Although some people say allow the other person to anchor, because sometimes you can go and anchor at 200k, but in the other person's mind, for them, they are thinking 400k is a reasonable figure. So by the time you go there and you anchor at 200, in their mind they'll be thinking, well, we would have been happy to pay 400, but this person has just said 200. Let's keep quiet and let's leave it. Because in their own mind they'll be thinking, we were going to pay 400, this person said 200, automatically we've saved ourselves 200k. In fact, let us try and negotiate and haggle and everything, so that if we remove another 50k off, we have now saved ourselves 250k. So there are some people who say let the other party come and anchor. Who should anchor first? That's a topic for another podcast episode, but I'm just trying to let you guys know that when it comes to negotiating, this whole thing of anchoring is really, really important. Setting reference points, really, really important. And please, for those of us who are in industries where we argue back and forth, wedding photography, makeup artist, fashion designer, who again? Those kind of, those industries, we know ourselves that, people can be pricing here and pricing there. Please stop going straight to your lowest package all the time. You're putting yourself in a losing proposition. If you have decided that 150k is what you need to be comfortable at the end of each deal, then please don't go in there and start talking 150k. Go in there and anchor higher, anchor at 200 or anchor at 250, so that if you start at 250 and they price you down to 180, it's not all that bad. Okay, 30 minutes, so let me move on. So that's about anchoring. Then concessions. There's some stuff on the internet about concessions. A concession just means what you're willing to give in, but on the internet they spoke about concessions and trade-offs. Now, I'll prefer that you guys think about it in terms of trade-offs. And this is just what a trade-off means. A trade-off just means I give you something and I get something in return. I scratch your back, you scratch my own back. So, don't think of it in terms of concessions. What can I give away? Think of it in terms of trade-offs. I have given you something. Then you have to give me something too. In fact, this is what professional negotiators call non-principal concessions. That's when you go in and somebody says that, look, reduce the price to from that 150 is too high, reduce it to 140. You say, okay, I agree, 140. And then you keep quiet. Professional negotiators, they call that a non-principled concession. You made a concession in an unprincipled manner. What you should do is that if you say, okay, I'm reducing the price, you now ask for something in return. So in industries like in the tech space where people supply hardware, typically if they budge on the price, they like to go up on the quantity. So somebody might say, look, these computers that we're buying, blah, 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 1.5 M for one Apple computer is too much. So we'll buy the computer at 1.4, take it or leave it. And then you say, okay, no problem. I agree. I'll reduce my price to 1.4 for each Apple computer. However, for this thing to make sense, if we're bringing this price down to 1.4, you cannot just buy only one computer. You cannot only buy 10 computers from me. You have to increase the order size. If we're doing 1.4 for each Apple computer, by the way, I don't know how much Apple computers talk. I'm just freestyling here, so don't quote me on that. So You tell them, okay, no problem. Instead of 1.5, I agree 1.4. But then, instead of buying only 10 pieces, you now have to buy at least 15 pieces for me for this price to make sense. That is a trade-off, or that is a principal concession. You want me to do this for you? No problem. But for us to do that, you now have to do something for me in return. And this is what I require to make this thing work. So don't go in there and just agree. They say, oh, give me this, you agree. Give me that, you agree. Whenever they say, give me something, and you feel like, I want this deal, let me take it, no problem. But you now ask for something in return. And the funny thing happens. When you get into the habit of doing trade-offs and making principal concessions, people start asking you for less concessions because they realize that, okay, this babe, every time I ask her to do this, she will agree. But she will not ask me for that on the other end, and then they will calm down. So, okay, this is 30 minutes, so let me just bring it to a close. There are plenty of things to consider, and we can always keep going on and on and on about the topic of negotiation. And of course, if the question comes up again, I will be able, I'll bring that up. I'll bring that up again. Then, let's see. I have one resource here that I think you guys should try out. There's something called the Negotiations Ninja podcast. Now, unfortunately, the guys in the commercial business-to-business context, so there's some of the things that they talk about on the podcast that might not apply to everybody. So those of us, my wedding photography people, my makeup artists, my cake artists, it might not apply to you. But always remember, whenever you're listening to these resources, don't listen and say, this thing does not apply to me. Listen and try and think, this thing that I've heard so far, how can I apply it in my space? So if you listen to it that way, then you will find that the Negotiations Ninja podcast is a good resource. So try and look for Negotiations Ninja podcast. I'm not sure if they're on YouTube, but they're definitely on iTunes, Spotify, and all the other podcast players. So start from there, and you will also receive recommendations from whatever podcast player that you use on other negotiations podcasts, and then that's how you're going to get real good on negotiations. But basically what I'm trying to say is, for a bunch of you who are discovering this podcast, you guys think this is a very valuable resource, and I'm glad that you do. And yes, it is a valuable resource. I'm giving out a whole bunch of stuff over here for free, but this is not the only resource that you will ever need. I only talk about things from a sales and business development perspective, but there are other things that are going to be required of you in your business journey. You'll have to learn negotiations. Eventually, you're going to hire a bunch of people, so you will need to learn leadership skills. What else? So, other podcasts, yes, pay attention to other podcasts too. But of course, make sure that my own podcast is always on rotation, and that we continue our own love relationship here, even if you go and look for things someplace else. So, that's all for today, folks. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And remember, if you'd like to connect and explore opportunities with me, then call me. Phone number is 080-6466-2140. That's my WhatsApp number as well. The country code is +234 for those of you who are not Nigerian. And then for social media, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll catch you guys tomorrow.